All right, it's 2 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started at this second workshop. Thank you all for being here, and for those of you on the Teams link, welcome as well. We try to start all of our discussions with the antitrust admonition, so I will read to you again what our charter says as a reminder. The Commission strictly prohibits members of the task force and their employees and other entities or persons that may participate in task force activities from using their participation in task force activities as a forum for engaging in practices or communications that violate applicable antitrust laws. As a result, task force representatives and their member organizations are committed to full compliance with federal and state antitrust laws and to maintaining the highest ethical standards in the way that we conduct our activities. So today we've got a jam-packed 90 minutes. We will have to be rather strict on time limits with our presenters. We've got 5 presentations, so if you can keep your time to 15 minutes each, that would be much appreciated. For those of you that are online, we will post all of the presentations in the project, along with contact information from those folks that are presenting so that you can direct questions to them. I do, though, want to make sure that we give time for the task force members to ask questions. Given our time constraints, we just likely won't be able to get to all the public member questions today. But like I said, we will post the materials in the project. And along with contact information. So if you've got questions, you'll have a way to get those answers. We will try to monitor a little bit in the Teams chat, but I encourage members of the public to reach out to the presenters directly to ask questions. Yeah, and just for good. Just a reminder, if you're on the Teams, to please mute yourself unless you're talking. And so with that, let's go ahead and get going. Here's my proposed lineup: Shell, Sunrun, AutoGrid, Tesla, and Octopus. So if that works for Shell to go first, I will turn it over to you. And if you would please introduce yourself, and you can take control of the Teams and share your presentation if you'd like, or I can share it however you want to do it.
Hi, this is Brian London from actually Sonnen. We're a subsidiary of Shell. Can you hear me? I want to make sure. Okay. And I will share my screen. You should be able to see.
Yep, we can see it.
The slide now. Great. Okay. Yeah, so I'm Brian London. I'm the Director of VPP Project Innovation at Sonnen. And prior to that, I was actually part of Shell and a renewable energy group focused on the behind the meter assets in general. So Sonnen was acquired by Shell in 2019. But was founded in 2010 with the goal of actually providing systems and capabilities like we're here to talk about today. So there are 3 pillars that we were founded on and continue to be true today. The first 2 have to do with the battery storage system. So the chemistry used by our modules, the LFP chemistry, was selected for 2 reasons, primarily longevity and safety, because our DNA and our focus has always been, or started and continues to be, focused on residential energy storage. So these systems are located in people's homes and are being used primarily for the 3rd pillar of actually swarm control, for providing benefits to either the utility, or it's really the utility and the grid operators as the primary beneficiary. So that has been the DNA. The batteries that we have in Germany that have been installed over the last decade have all been installed not to provide backup or resiliency, because that is not a need that they have in Germany with the power lines being underground and the complete lack of outages. They are being used purely to provide grid services and more value to grid operators and retailers. So we have over 100,000 batteries now installed worldwide, and most of those are actually providing grid services like we are here to talk about today, and the full range of grid services. So as we talked about, starting in Germany, where we were founded, that has been the focus, and we're actually supporting the largest German utility with actually providing frequency service today, and that has been the case for several years. So this is really our bread and butter and our DNA, and really the focus was in Germany, because our batteries can be dispatched in a matter of seconds, and we're providing high-speed telemetry or high-resolution telemetry, that this is something that they can use, and the utility there sees the most benefit from providing frequency regulation. In the United States, because of the need for resiliency and other things, it started off a little bit differently, where that was the focus. So in 2017, really the first start of using aggregation capabilities. We started there in Arizona, and then moved into providing capabilities in other markets, California. But really the biggest breakthrough was when we provided a project in Utah, Soley Lofts, where with one community, an all-electric community with 600 units, all with batteries, all inside people's homes. Actually, as you see the picture here, it is inside the living quarters, in the living room, right next to the kitchen, actually putting the systems in there and starting to use those 600 units for the utility Rocky Mountain Power. So Rocky Mountain Power has the ability to dispatch all of those units. That project grew as we were working with Rocky Mountain Power. I'll get back to this slide, where now Rocky Mountain Power has launched a program for any single homeowner or small or commercial customer to acquire solar and storage, and then give control of their batteries to the utilities, so then the utility can actually use that capacity. It's really interesting. I'll go back to this, that they have demonstrated a wide number of capabilities. Some of the benefits there with we're actually being able to provide regulation up. Some of the so this slide shows a number of things. First, with the aggregation, we're providing the ability to compensate the load. Basically, is curtailing the demand from the grid. Some other tests that they've shown showing if this 1.5 megawatts was the expected amount of capacity that our VPP could bring at this time, this cluster could bring. What happens if the utility asks for a lot more, looking at doubling that capacity? So there should be no way we could provide that, and they could see actually there is more capacity there that we tell them. So if they do call on more capacity for a shorter period of time, they know that they have a safety margin there, but we will only commit to a certain level. And then, of course, being able to charge the fleet and then provide a frequency events as well. So it was a really interesting case where in this short period of time, we provided a wide number of grid services. This has been expanded. We took a lot of these models with the single family homes and have launched a program in California where single family homeowners are able to acquire solar and storage, and then we dispatch the batteries on their behalf, providing capacity, bidding it into the day ahead and real time markets. We're soon to be providing ancillary services as well, spending reserves there in California. And then the plan launch, it will be launching in Texas. So it's very applicable to what we're here to talk about, where we're going to be, again, with a focus on single family homes and apartments, including low to medium income, actually using our fleet to in this model, provide the value to a retailer and they're pleasing. So we have soon to have a lot of capacity to support this project or the potential pilot. So with that, really wanted to focus on our recommendations for that. As you can see from the quick overview, there's a lot more information on the slides that you can review offline, and I'll be happy to answer questions offline. But based on all that experience, we have a couple recommendations for how to move forward in the pilot. So first and foremost, one of the important things is to have uniform, simple standard rules for DERs across the entire region. So every TDSP. This will really simplify and make it easier for everyone to participate and not have any entities that feel like they are unfairly left out of this opportunity. Bringing DERs into the mix and being able to use them on a large scale provides actually a lot of value to really all the stakeholders. A lot of what Sonnen has been about is we are not competing with utilities. It's been a lot of our business models we are working hand in hand to help them, help retailers, and everybody wins as we're starting to intelligently use the behind the meter resources. Another big piece I think is really important is to use an open standard that is then dictated by the regulators, such as IEEE 2030.5. That can be a standard that everyone understands and can use, and not to require OEMs to provide APIs into their system. This can be very dangerous, but also primarily a lot of this is really sensitive information that is only provided to specific partners, and most OEMs would not be willing to share with everyone else. So having a standard, even if it's just based on an open standard, really simplifies and opens access to everyone. Another important piece is to really simplify the access to residential accounts. Residential accounts, there is already an interconnection requirement, and really having a simple process for homeowners and installers to follow where they can interconnect the systems, and everyone can understand that there are certain operating limits for these systems. This really helps streamline the process, gets more and more capacity in there. What we're seeing with Rocky Mountain Power, it's been streamlined and more people are adopting this. It's expected to grow substantially. We're installing 40 to 70 batteries a week there. So as you can see, it's a very large program, and it's really much simpler because of the standard process there than it is in other markets. Performance evaluation. This is a big piece. So looking at what has been provided across a number of different targets. A lot of this can be based on those performance evaluation on what happened, and also looking at what is the capacity that can be brought on the solution. So for determining what has happened, what we are thinking is you can use your existing standards and existing data resolution standards for the data, and we can provide that. So we're going to be using revenue grade meters in ERCOT that actually have a 2-second telemetry. We can provide higher telemetry if we needed to. So it's not that we think that they should be at that level. We think that actually we just felt like a belt and suspenders solution would be required because of some of the capabilities that our retailer partners need. So it's probably sufficient to use the data resolution standards for the different products that exist today, and have that be at the aggregate level, not the device level. So, however, for looking at what has been done and actually has been provided in an M&V sense, at that we actually think that could be useful in seeing what's happening at the device level. So for clusters to actually provide a certain amount of capacity, this is actually what has been provided both at the aggregate level, and then for us to do M&V showing, okay, at least for the pilot to show, look, this is how we did it with all these different devices that made up that cluster. We also feel that it's important to allow the queasy to actually do that verification themselves. So this is what's done in California. Often my colleagues at Shell Energy, they actually use a third party to verify this themselves, so that there's actually no chance of us making a mistake, or a tiny chance of having an error there, because it's all done by a third party. But it is Shell who is actually stamping that and saying to CAISO that yes, this is exactly what was provided at the device level. That's done. It doesn't need to be revenue grade, so we have revenue grade meters also in California because of some of the business arrangements we have set up there. We're actually not seeing a major benefit from that data. The third party that has provided that doesn't see that really it's providing any extra fidelity or accuracy from that information. But I think it's important to test the capacity with tests. I mean, this is something that is widely done for ERS and other cases, when a load serving entity or queasy says this is the capacity that I can deliver you from the aggregation, that should be verified with unannounced testing, so that everyone can be sure this is actually what is provided. And Sun, in the way, because we're very conservative as a part of the Shell family, we are very conservative in what we say announce that capacity to be. Our VPP software optimizes the value across all those different batteries. Lastly, I'll close with that we believe that it should be really the economic incentives to drive the dispatch of this, and not have it be something that the utility is actually has a equal way to drive the dispatch and charging of these systems in addition to the market. So I think I'm out of time here, but happy to answer any questions offline.
Thanks, Brian, for that. In the room, any questions for Brian?
The level of installed meter. Again, he mentioned an advanced meter. What's that interplay with your systems? I mean, how does that work?
So our system.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
Brian. Go ahead.
So our systems internally have their own metering, but in addition, we're using external revenue grade meters to provide other data on what's happening outside of the system, and that it also helps us look at using revenue grade data what's happening from the dedicated solar arrays. So our battery operates on the internal meters, but then we use the revenue grade meters offline for other partners. It's not during operation, it's offline.
Okay.
I know there are some task force members on the teams. Do any of y'all have a question for Brian? Anybody else in the room before we turn over to Sunrun?
One quick question about the application of that IEEE 2030.5. You mentioned it is super dangerous. Can you tell me? Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the question. Can someone repeat it?
Sure, I can help repeat it. So the question is, you made a comment about opening up APIs is dangerous. I guess you meant from a cybersecurity, just a general IP security perspective. Could you elaborate on that, Brian?
Sure. So with the APIs, for example, if Sun was to publish our APIs and someone had access to them, they would understand how to get into the batteries and could potentially operate them directly. So there's a lot of security protections against that, but we all know that some people are very capable and can get around these protections. So we feel that it's one of the protections because of these APIs allow someone to really communicate with the processors inside our battery. That is something we want to prevent anyone else from having access to unless they are a trusted partner.
I just wanted to clarify, add something to the question. So it's not the IEEE standard that is dangerous, it is opening up the APIs, and our concern is more cybersecurity and protecting the proprietary information. And we generally support competition, and we allow aggregators to work with us to sign NDA and open up our APIs to the aggregators, and we have worked with several aggregators who are providing service here. So it's the concern is with making it all public to everyone, and if that is a concern, then we believe it needs to be discussed and debated separately and decided separately, which we feel is outside the scope of the pilot.
So that means IEEE 2030 is sufficient enough to handle those kind of cybersecurity issues?
I believe then maybe more needs to be developed. I'll let Brian handle that question.
Yeah, we think that it has the safety protections on how it can, what it can communicate with and what it can impact, because the messages are specific. You can't really get to do any of the nefarious things that I'm more worried about. But I don't mean to imply that 2030.5 is a perfect standard that would allow us to do everything that we want to do. So, for example, Rock Mountain Power is using that standard, but they've had to add specific PacifiCore, their subsidiary PacifiCore, specific messages so that they can provide all the ancillary services that they want to do. So I think it can be expanding that standard would be potentially the right thing. But there are other competing standards that could be chosen as well. We just think that 2030.5 is a better one.
Thank you. Margot at Tepri, I see you have your hand up.
I do, and this is actually just a question if everybody would address this. I'm curious if you have in any way measured sort of the socioeconomic diversity of the people who are using the system. Is there any way that you've been able to measure that or understand if there's low income or moderate income people using the VPP? And just so I don't have to ask this every time, it would be great if you haven't done it, just let us know. But if you have, would love to follow up and really understand the model. So that's just for all of the speakers. Thank you.
And that Scott Henson has a question in the chat that kind of piggybacks off of that on describing the participation model for low-income participants. So Brian, I'll let you address that issue first if you have something to respond with.
Sure. So what we do have low-income people who have solar and storage, and it's mostly apartments. I think it's almost exclusively apartments, and it's really because the property owners and developers who have those have installed the systems. So it's really we to get a larger adoption of that and have them be able to participate in the VPPs. It's really about having an entity that's willing to invest in the infrastructure to put the systems in there. It's not a cheap investment.
All right. Given time, we'll turn it over to Sunrun. Amy, you can share your screen if you'd like, or I can share whichever way you want to do it.
Great. I think if it is easy for you, and good afternoon, everyone. It'd be great if you could share it, Jason, not to put you on the spot, but just to make sure it goes smoothly. That would be great. Just because I don't seem to have the ability to do that here. And while you're bringing up our presentation, I will just say thank you to our other Sunrun team members who are on the call as well today. We have Rachel McMahon and Yang Yu who will be on hand to answer questions at the end, but Rachel is like our expert in California and in a lot of our wholesale markets. So really wanted to bring in and share our expertise today. We're going to focus on part of the request was to talk about VPP experiences across the country, similar to Sonnen, and so we'll focus on wholesale markets as well as some bring your own device type programs, which I think can be instructive for the NOEs as well, as since we're trying to encourage participation. We've got some folks in the room, making that happen. So on the first, and then we'll have a few recommendations at the end, which are some similar consensus with Sonnen as well. So first, Rachel, if I can ask you, it looks like we've got at least the beginning of the slides. We'll go to the first slide, which is on wholesale markets, specifically in California. Arushi, I know you're going to dig into some of the pieces in California as well, but we wanted to make sure we touched on a bit some of the elements coming out of CAISO that we can learn from, good and bad. So Rachel, I'll turn it over to you.
Amy, I knew you were going to do CAISO, so actually go ahead and definitely cover this. And we decided to go with some other stuff too.
Oh, great.
In ours.
Sounds great. Perfect. Great minds. Rachel, I'll turn it over to you.
Rachel, you're muted, I think.
Oh shoot, can folks hear Rachel at all?
No.
Yeah, I cannot.
How about now? Can you hear me now?
There you are.
Okay, great. Sorry, my headset failed on me. My apologies. So, hello, Rachel McMahon with the policy group at Sunrun. And as Amy mentioned, I focus largely on California. So Sunrun does have resources participating in the CAISO wholesale market, so aggregations of residential batteries that provide dispatchable reliability capacity via the load reduction model, which is called the proxy demand response model in PDR. And PDR is also dispatched in the residual unit commitment process. Now, there are several different market models within California. So PDR, as I mentioned, is the demand response model. It values only load reduction. There is a model that the CAISO does have in their tariff. They've had it there for about 7 years, since 2015, called the Distributed Energy Resource Provider Model, or the DERP, which is my personal favorite acronym. And that market model is designed to, or was designed to, allow for multiple different types of DERs. So whether it be demand response or storage or electric vehicles or what have you, to aggregate together and provide a combined response, or a combined resource to the wholesale market. And it also values export. So it allows for export to the grid, whereas PDR does not. As of today, there are not any resources participating in the DERP model because there are very complex requirements associated with it, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So Mr. London touched on this, but the CAISO scheduling coordinator metered entity, or the SCME option, so scheduling coordinators in CAISO are analogous to QSEs and ERCOT, so that model is deemed sufficient for all data for PDR and DERP resources. So this includes metering and telemetry. So the CAISO does not touch any site level or device level data from aggregated resources. This is done entirely through the scheduling coordinator in CAISO, and we extend this recommendation to ERCOT so that all data and validation be handled by the QSC. And again, Mr. London touched on this point. And I'll also mention here, so we say here that resources less than 10 megawatts are exempted from establishing telemetry, from submitting telemetry with CAISO. And this also applies to resources that are not load resources that are also providing ancillary services. So this was a point of discussion in the CAISO's Order 2222 filing with the FERC. And the CAISO said, look, the SCME option, or the scheduling coordinator metered entity option, is sufficient for our purposes for telemetry, and the FERC accepted it. So there's no device or premise level metering or telemetry requirement. So we're able to submit our telemetry and provide our telemetry using our existing metering equipment. Let's see here. So for measurement and verification, so settlement is based on sub-metering the battery in CAISO using the MGO methodology. So MGO stands for meter generator output. The twist here, as I mentioned earlier, is that the CAISO under the PDR model does not allow for accounting battery exports, and so energy and capacity settlement must be capped at load. And as we will discuss a little more later, we do recommend allowing for exports under the ERCOT pilot. And then finally, load resources are exempt from bid mitigation in CAISO. So I don't believe this is an issue in ERCOT, but given a 24/7 bidding requirement to participate in the day-ahead and real-time markets, this ability to manage use limitations by bidding high when needed, not all the time, is definitely necessary. So next slide.
Great. And then thanks, Rachel. And then on the next slide, just wanted to highlight ISO New England. So we're going into the other part of the other side of the country. This is where Sunrun was the first DER provider to successfully win an aggregated DER wholesale capacity bid. It's a forward-looking bid. So we received that bid, or won that bid 3 years ago. We began delivering on that bid this summer in 2022, and that is a scheduled dispatch. So a little bit different than CAISO, where we actually do dispatch those electrons. It is scheduled seasonally, every day for a certain number of hours every day. The other piece I did want to call out in ISO New England is that it does not negate other values or rate design. So of course, in some of the regulated markets, there is net metering. There's also other programs in place in some of those states, and it does not mean you can only participate and have that battery reserved only for that capacity market or for that wholesale market, but rather you can actually participate and layer on values. So I think that's something to keep in mind as this task force moves forward and different types of models become available. So just some of those top level lessons that Rachel called out, and just to hit home a little bit, is as we think about how we can provide benefits. We're really focused on ancillary services here, but just to call out that these load resources can also be used to reduce base load, the rucking requirements or the other peaking or reliability needs as the commission looks at additional market reforms or reliability needs. And then Rachel, you may have more color here, but I think the call out was, the market programs, especially some of them limit the battery use just to load reduction. That doesn't take advantage of the battery's full potential. So, Commissioner McAdams and PUC, I know the focus is going to be on testing that export of electrons, which we certainly applaud, to fully leverage what is available and what we could bring to the market. Rachel, any other lessons you want to call out here, or something that I missed?
Just to provide a little more detail on, so I mentioned in the prior slide that, creating, and this is our final point on this slide, is that overly restrictive requirements lead to no participation. So just to give a little more color to what I mentioned on the prior slides, I mentioned the DIRT model. So there are multiple reasons why no one's participating in it. So there's no capacity value, there's very prescriptive interconnection requirements, there's a lack of a sufficient deliverability methodology, no ability to stack value, even if those values are not coincident. And Sunrun's been working with the CAISO and state regulators, realizing that this is a very different market structure than we have in ERCOT for 5 years in order to alleviate some of these, and still to date, there's no one participating in it. So we just really want to hammer home the point. And also, as Mr. London did quite eloquently in his presentation, is that creating restrictive requirements for load resources will certainly restrict participation in this pilot. So we really urge against that.
Great. And then we are going to, on the next slide, we're going to shift gears just briefly. What I did want to bring up to this group and make sure that we call out is that while we're, big focus is on the energy market, the wholesale market, what I wanted to spend just a minute talking about are the bring your own device programs that are often either.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yes. Yep.
Before you run on, we really need you to walk through, in ISO New England, under the capacity construct, what level are you being accredited at in there? That would be good for us to know as we walk through these other market design proposals.
And Commissioner, is the question, when you say what level we're being credited at, do you mean in terms of how much of the capacity or the battery output or something else?
No, the capacity. What are you being accredited at for the purposes of your forward capacity obligation?
Right. We are at 5 megawatts that we are providing. If that's what your question is, Commissioner.
5 megawatts out of what are they? I mean, is that 100% or are you on a percentage basis? How do they account for your forward capacity commitment?
So the question is about duration. So, like, if a generator resource can be accredited for up to 90% of its value in ELCC,
right,
is there any D-rate or any discount applied on DER capacity as compared to a traditional resource, or is there a separate accreditation process for the complete contribution capability of DERs? I mean, I'm assuming that the wholesale capacity bid is towards batteries, but if you could just clarify, like, how are batteries getting into the accreditation model?
Got it. Appreciate the clarification. Yang, can I ask you to chime in here?
Sure. Thanks, Amy. So for ISO New England, the demand response participation model we chose, so ISO New England defined what is the performance measurement hour by summer and winter. So at each battery level, your capacity contribution is going to be measured at the inverter production level, to measure what's your battery production over those performance hour in both summer and winter period. And in terms of MMV, ISO New England allow to sub-metering the production data to measure as your performance.
So you're getting accredited at different levels based on the level of inverter that you're using.
Yep, so the performance data is at the inverter level, and ISO New England defines certain hour as the performance measurement hour for both summer and winter season.
Got it, thank you.
Thanks, commissioners, and sorry to speak over you, and apologies for not being in the room. Just holler if you have additional questions there. We can come back to a few other clarifying questions at the end. Just quickly on the aggregated DER programs, not part of wholesale markets. I did want to mention that we do participate in a number of these. There are about a dozen of them set up around the country. In our Teams folder, we'll upload the full list of available BYOD programs around the country so you can see when they're scheduled, how they work. Wanted to include this because this could be a model for how NOEs, or even if the distribution utilities wanted to expand or participate in a DR, their demand response programs, could actually better utilize batteries, and especially for the NOEs, not directly part of ERCOT. But this would be, a mass market solution where it is very similar, seasonally scheduled. These are generally 2 to 4 hours a day for every day. There are some BYOD programs that also have a day ahead option that are sort of reflected based on the forecast and not in that real-time pricing. And enrollment in those programs can range, or that enrollment commitment can range from 5 to 10 years. So certainly just wanted to make sure we bring those forward, as I think some of the municipal utilities and co-ops are trying to think through where could there be an opportunity for participation. I do call out in a bullet at the end that there's different models for sending market signals to get participation and enrollment. That can include an upfront enrollment incentive, a monthly flat payment for enrollment and showing up, and then also sometimes there is a payment premium of exported electrons during the same time. In cases like Hawaii, it's going to be all three added together. So depending on how much you want to entice enrollment into these programs and creating value and enrollment for these battery programs. That can also help, you know, I know Scott and Margot, you both asked about low and moderate income participation, depending on the goals of a utility or a NOE, that is also taken into consideration as well. Sunrun's approach when it comes to low and moderate income certainly is increasing access through our financing models for single family, but we also have a multifamily team focused on affordable housing units. And in these instances, we would do solar plus batteries, and they could be aggregated into either of these programs, whether it's a BYOD program or the wholesale market. And that's a way to actually bring tangible benefits to those tenants in those affordable housing units. So kind of a single family approach as well as multifamily. And then the next slide is just an example of some of those BYOD programs. But if you'd like to go to the last slide, just for time, these are just some other recommendations. Rachel, if you would like to walk through a few of these just to hit home what we've already chatted about or have also heard from Brian.
Sure. Quickly, so we have mentioned full utilization of the battery by allowing for grid exports. Let's see, straightforward enrollment requirements that use universal terms and conditions. So based on our analysis thus far, this does not appear to be an issue in ERCOT, but in other jurisdictions, we do run into overly prescriptive customer protection authorization requirements. Those certainly should be avoided. Let's see here. So going down to utilizing existing equipment for metering and telemetry, and ensuring that settlement requirements match current inverter telemetry requirements. Again, to draw it back to Mr. London's presentation, he had recommended using 2030.5 standards rather than OEM APIs. We would make the same recommendation. And just to make a further point to that one, it's very important to ensure fulsome participation in this pilot because, of course, all aggregators are not also battery manufacturers. And also to allow storage resources participating in an ALR to bid hourly non-spin service so long as the resource has sufficient energy to fully meet its obligations within the 1 hour dispatch window. This just, you know, an associated recommendation here would be to the extent to which there's concern about our resources being able to provide non-spin without being fully charged is to allow state of charge to be, you know, a biddable parameter within the model.
Thank you, Rachel. And Amy, we're at time. I'll pause to see if anybody has questions before we go to AutoGrid.
I had a question in the chat.
Okay.
Scott's question is, can you provide more details on prevented from stacking value?
Yes, my apologies. I just answered that one in the chat. So there can be categoric prohibitions on program participation or provision of services. So one example I have is in one jurisdiction, so a load resource cannot participate, and I'm talking about non-market integrated programs, but what's considered a day ahead program and day of in terms of the calls using the same resource, even if the resource could physically participate in both without double counting or compensation, or categorically prohibited. And another example, and also, excuse me, there are instances in which programs could be stacked on top of each other, and a resource provider is only paid for any incremental benefit. So here, when we're talking about value stacking, to be very clear, we're not asking for double compensation or double payment, but we can provide multiple different services. And so that's the recommendation there. And I'll also say, anyway, so I won't further elaborate on that unless there are further questions.
Thank you, Rachel and Amy. I appreciate that. We'll move on to AutoGrid and JP from Generac. I haven't forgotten you. We're actually going to try to squeeze you in. So.
Jason, it's Shell, Sunrun, Tesla, AJ, Octopus, Generac.
That's right.
So Tesla will do that.
Yeah. Okay. AutoGrid. Next.
Sure, I wanted,
Tesla
Yeah,
support.
sure, I wanted to introduce Sadia Ravindran, who is from AutoGrid out in the Bay Area right now, and she's going to guide us through some of the VPP experiences. Go ahead, Sadia.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sadia Ravindran. I'm leading the Industry Solutions team at AutoGrid. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'll just share my screen here and make sure it's all set up. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
All right. So just a little bit about AutoGrid. Sorry, just one sec. Just making sure. Okay. So we have been identified as a leader in energy flexibility management. We were founded in 2012, and since then we've served 50 customers, over 50 customers globally. We have about 6,000 megawatts on our platform, and we've been operating in over 17 countries. Recently, as many of you know, we've been acquired by Schneider Electric, and this has given us an opportunity to expand our offering to provide the full suite of services all the way from the control room to the end consumer or prosumer. On the right here, you have some of our sort of marquee customers across the globe, and we've also served 7 out of the 10 largest utilities in the world. So when we talk about flexibility management, often the terms DERMS and VPP are used in similar contexts for similar customers or interchangeably. For us, it's all about energy flexibility management. What the context in which you use this energy flexibility may differ from one versus the other. In the context of DERMS, it may be used directly for network management and managing constraints in specific parts of the network. In the context of VPPs, it may be used as an additional source of supply, and the role of platform providers like us is to make that source of supply as dispatch grade as possible. So for a leading VPP platform provider, and this also ties into some of our recommendations here, given that we're looking to serve the end customers and continue to serve them with changing dynamics around a decarbonization or more uncertainty around grid operations, et cetera, we really need to be focused on how production-proven various vendors and providers are, how scalable and extensible this platform is, because today you may be talking about a pilot of 100 or 1,000 assets, and that's going to soon scale up as more and more customers deploy these DERs. And then a platform needs to also be able to support mixed assets, not just a single asset type. And this ties into multiple sources of value for all the stakeholders that are involved here. When you have multiple assets that are being managed on the platform, that means that you can address a larger portion of the DERs that have been deployed in the territory. You can deliver benefits to a larger number of customers. And this also, the ability to be mixed asset or support mixed assets on the platform also means that you have to have a platform that is open and vendor agnostic. This is something that we find that there are mixed approaches to this, and we have always advocated for the use of open standards, open protocols, as some speakers have mentioned earlier, and also openness even if you don't subscribe to specific standards. And what that means is that both as a vendor or a manufacturer or a provider of DER, you are not tied to a specific platform, and the platform is not tied to specific types of DERs either, that you're open in both directions. And that, we believe, is the best way to scale and the best way to serve the end customers who are most impacted by some of the issues that we're seeing today. And then finally, this is just to be able to enhance the value across all multiple types of stakeholders in the value chain, the ability to optimize across multiple markets and value streams. We're finding that this is becoming more and more important to our customers, and therefore by extension their customers who are the end users of electricity. So just to go through a couple of our production deployments of VPPs across markets. So CPS Energy, one of our oldest customers, we've been working with them for over 6 years now. They have about 200 megawatts of flexibility or resources onboarded on our platform that we're managing for them across 10 different types of programs that cut across both commercial and industrial customers and residential customers. And the important aspect of how we went about deploying this here was also that we were serving the role of a system of systems, which means that we have other subsystems that are managing certain parts of the overall portfolio or certain types of DERs that are plugging into our platform. And from a CPS perspective, it's all flexibility that they used to use and dispatch to reduce their transmission charges during 4CP days, and also as a source of supply, so as to offset any sort of supply side risk and exposure that they're experiencing. For NRG, again, the notion of a unified platform that's open, that can cut across customer types and brands, that's the reason why we've been chosen to serve them, and they're using us across multiple brands in their portfolio. CPA Energy's CPA Clean Power Alliance, they're the largest community choice aggregator in California. And I think earlier someone had asked the question about low-income communities. This is very important for our customers and also important for us as the entity that's deploying these VPPs to expand the net and allow as many customers to participate and benefit from such VPP deployments. So we're enrolling customers from low-income communities and focused on multi-dwelling units and working with CPA to construct programs or design programs that enable participation from these customers as well. So they get to share in the benefits too. And I'd also like to touch upon some of our deployments in Australia, because Australia is also seeing a lot of the similar kinds of challenges that we're seeing in some of the markets where there's high penetration of DER in the US. There are customers who are also retailers are interested in monetizing the value of flexibility across multiple market products. So they have 6 market products that are associated with just frequency regulation, each with a different response time. There's slow, fast, and delayed. And based on the resources that are being managed on our platform, certain resources can participate in certain market products depending on the response time. And for them, what they're interested in is being able to participate in the frequency control ancillary services market product, in addition to the wholesale demand response mechanism market product, and figure out what is the best opportunity for them, and which opportunity does it make most sense to bid this flexibility into. Ultimately, all of this ends up serving the grid, but for our customers, it's about enhancing the value of their portfolio and then and passing that on down to their customers, who also get to participate in these types of programs. So just emphasizing the point around mixed asset VPPs, from an ADER grid perspective, we have over 100 DER fulfillment partners across customer types and asset types. So it's residential, commercial, industrial, load resources, storage. EVSCs are now becoming very, very common in our deployments. And the goal of this is to just aggregate across these asset types and deliver the maximum amount of flexible megawatts to a retailer or utility who's using this for grid services or to monetize the value of this in markets. So here on the right, we have an example mixed asset VPP to show you roughly how this breaks down in terms of different asset types. And in different territories, this could look different, but just to give the audience here an idea. So CNI customers, that's about a fourth. If you look at just residential loads, that could be anywhere between 40 to 50% of the overall capacity of a VPP. And then you add residential storage, EV charging. Now, these are the resources that we're seeing the fastest amount of growth in. So these percentages could change very drastically as you're looking at how this VPP grows over time. BDR, it's a way to bring and enable low-income communities to also participate in these types of programs where they have full control of how to adjust or flex their usage so as to serve the grid. And as these programs advance over time, you can transition these behavioral demand response participants to automated demand response with DERs being provided to them as well. And generators are also included in the mix, depending on, again, this could change depending on the specific market context, but that's an example here. And so how we deliver these multi-asset VPPs and the fundamental way in which we're able to do this, and what we would recommend also from the point of view of VPPs deployed in Texas, is to take an open standards based and open approach. Our platform is open and extensible, which means that since our inception, we've supported and advocated for the use of open standards, but we recognize that very many vendors don't have these kinds of accreditations or certifications in place, but they do have APIs. I think the subject of APIs came in earlier. So for us, we've also connected to and enabled the dispatch of these resources under certain conditions. So I think Brian London used the term trusted partner. So we serve as that trusted partner for very many vendor partners who look at whose APIs we've integrated with, and we've enabled participation through these assets. Now, whether APIs will persist over time, or that'll be the primary way in which we send control signals or dispatch these resources, remains to be seen. But we have, alongside maintaining a library of API-based integrations, we've also continued to develop to the latest open standards and protocols to ensure that we have the maximum or many different ways in which vendor partners and DER partners can interact and onboard onto our platform. And then, sorry, was there a question? Sorry. Yep. Yeah, so, and then now taking what the platform can do and the core capabilities of a platform in being an open, modular, and scalable platform, we layer on these additional services to essentially abstract away all the complexity involved with bringing in assets that are deployed behind the meter, or assets that are distributed energy resources that are deployed across a network. And this could, this ranges from program design and implementation, marketing and recruitment, which is everything in terms of finding where the resources are and streamlining the process by which these customers are able to participate, and then the enrollment, registration, and onboarding of these resources, which means having the ability to be able to dispatch these resources under specified contractual conditions. Because anytime our customers are involving the end customers, there are certain parameters or conditions under which they will interact with the asset. So we have to make sure that those are maintained. And then after you dispatch these resources, then processing customer incentives and settlements to ensure that they get to share in the benefits, and tying all of this into the network operations and ISO market operations. We are a registered QSC in ERCOT, and so we provide those types of services on behalf of our customers. We support our retailer and market participant customers in this regard. We do not serve as a retailer or play that role on our own. And then, taking this a step forward and then optimizing across multiple value streams and market products that any of our customers may have access to. Our customers may fall on different parts of the spectrum in terms of wanting us to recommend what the optimized way to participate in these multiple market products is versus, automating some of that workflow. It depends on what type of services they want, but from a market perspective, the idea is how do we increase and enhance the value for our customers and therefore the end users as well who are participating in these programs. And just in terms of delivering services in the context of Texas, so more broadly, maximum customer choice and maximizing the ability to tap into various value streams, and also focusing on how to expand the net so that you have more and more customers who are enabled to participate in VPPs is where our focus is and what we would recommend as well.
Thank you, Sadia. Any questions for AutoGrid?
Sadia, just wanted to bring up something. About 3 or 4 slides back, you had the resource mix in ERCOT, the sample resource mix, you had residential C&I, and then you had BDR. Would you explain what BDR is a little bit more?
Yeah, behavioral demand response. Right, so this is similar to how we, sorry, saying sharing is paused. Are you able to see my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I'd highlighted the example of Clean Power Alliance, which is the community choice aggregator in California that we're working with, where they have programs that are specifically directed towards low-income communities and families living in multi-dwelling units. So we are starting with a program around behavioral demand response for these customers. So they don't need to purchase a device or spend any upfront capital to be able to participate. And it's really up to them and entirely up to them in terms of how they participate and to the extent to which they participate, and they get compensated accordingly. And then transitioning this group of customers who are now used to participating in these types of programs to then more automated demand response types of schemes as well. But all of this ultimately ties into a mixed asset VPP, because it doesn't matter through what device or what mode the participation is happening, but we're able to aggregate this capacity and provide this capacity with some level of certainty to anyone who wants to monetize it, whether it's a retailer or a market participant in that regard.
Alex, did you have a question?
Yes, sir, I do. Sadia, making reference to the orchestrator role and maybe using the case of CPS as an example, is there anyone else offering the VPP service, or is it just AutoGrid? That's question one. And then question two is the application that you presented today, demand response application, or does it include injection?
Yeah, so so I'll answer question one in the context. Are you asking specifically in the context of CPS, or
yes.
more? Yeah. So CPS has several types of programs where they have a managed charging program that they're running at a smaller scale, and some other types of programs that they're looking at. But in terms of having multiple systems plug into a single platform and them using it as essentially a dispatch grade resource, I don't think there's a comparable outside of AutoGrid for CPS. And here I'd like to pull in John if you'd like to add anything there.
Well, I would say that to date it's been mostly managed as a demand response tool. In the future, there's a lot of potential of adding actual generation resources to that because of other programs going on at CPS, and so it'll basically do both things in the future.
So,
yeah, right.
That is absolutely correct. The only addition that I would add on there is, instead of there any others that offer the program, Generac has pulled back. They're starting their own program, but it's not nearly as robust as AutoGrid. They're trying to start it off with an API-enabled service, and then other than that, Enchanted Rock has their own NOC platform that they use, and that's strictly driven by old school, basically, carrier pigeon in order to
And what I'm getting at is the interaction to address local system issues, right? As you're having multiple devices engaging with the distribution system, having, the way you describe it makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, it's easier to be able to coordinate, right, that activity, rather than having 6, 7 players trying to feed information to a single source. Thank you.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. The system, I'm talking basically from my experience with CPS, the system is run out of the control room at CPS. So the controllers doing it themselves, aware of what's happening and scheduling it in either a day ahead or several hours ahead basis. But the other question was about, okay, we've answered that one. About the VPP services, Sadia, I think the question was, what other providers have a system that is that much of a multi-asset? I mean, I think there are others out there, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that we're the only ones, but I would say that our network of partners, because we've ultimately, for us, having an extensive network of partners means that we get to serve our customers better, right? So we focused a lot in terms of how to expand that network, especially for new types of resources around EV/EVSE management as well. And even there, to the extent that we can advocate for open standards such as Open ADR, or IEEE 2030.5 more recently, we will, because I think there is great benefit in having systems that are interoperable in this way. But the reality is that not everything is going to be certified to an open standard. So if you have to serve your customers, you kind of have to have multiple ways in which you have access these types of assets.
All right, thank you for that. So we have half of our presentations left and about a third of the time remaining. So, but good discussion, so I appreciate it. We're going to go to Tesla, then Octopus, and then Generac.
Okay, thank you. Let me get my presentation going, and then we will get going. I think we have the possibility here to move a little quicker. But I look forward to your questions as well. So I thought I'd actually take a little bit of a different tack on looking at VPP experiences and talk a little bit about the individual homeowner customers' experiences of being in a VPP, because I think that's going to be a little educational for us. It's easy when thinking about sort of the market enablement side of VPPs to get really focused on the market design piece of it or the platform and technical solution piece of it. But for it all to really succeed, you have to think about what it's going to take to actually get customers who ultimately are the owners of the assets that we're mobilizing here, to make sure that they buy into it and to make sure that it's successful and that the capacity that we need to mobilize gets mobilized. So to that end, talk first about sort of the customer enrollment and expectation setting with the customer up front. Speaking for Tesla, the way that we approach that is to go directly to the customer through the product itself, that is through our phone app with them, and communicate the opportunity to them there, engage with them there, make sure they're aware of the opportunity, that they know everything that they need to know about how this is going to impact their experience of being, an owner of this DER, of being a homeowner, of being a consumer of a retail electricity plant, how this is going to impact them. Collect any information we need from them to enroll. Now, a couple of points have been made before that we need to make this kind of engagement easy. There has been a lot of lessons learned through a lot of programs around the world where friction at this point can lead to high dropout and just failure of building the VPP in the first place. So in this case, potentially we're collecting or validating the easy ID of the premise that we're talking about, where the device is located, agree to terms and conditions, and then bring them through whatever enrollment process there is. And again, as streamlined as this can be, the better. Once through that process, the customer actually gets the opportunity within their product to communicate their preferences for how that ultimately gets realized. How much energy does the customer need personally for their own resiliency solutions for backup power? Affirm that they do have the ability to opt out of events as necessary. What's the priority in their mind between participating in this and other key functions for them, such as functions that protect them from weather and extra outages, things like that. So that's just a quick overview of how a customer comes to be in a virtual power plant, at least in the Tesla ecosystem. You see a screenshot there of, this is just an example from California. Tesla, as you may know, has a number of these VPPs, several dozen of them worldwide. We're going to bring out a few here that are, I don't know, illustrative. And this is an example of how we're getting the word out about VPP opportunities in our California market in particular. So a little bit more about what makes VPPs effective. You know, a lot of it has to do with the service being provided and the service that you're asking these customers to provide. At the end of the day, the customer has to be motivated to participate. You have to realize that these services that are being mobilized by the VPP aren't the primary use case for this device. These are customer devices in their home that they purchased for a reason that presumably was never meant to be grid support as its primary use case. That's typically resiliency, backup power, but also solar self-consumption, managing their own bills and energy costs, things like that. So, you know, there needs to be, you know, the providing of the service doesn't need to overly take away from those primary use cases if the customer is going to have a value proposition. The behavior also has to be understandable. That when it is dispatched, that the customer knows what's happening, or at least has enough information to trust that it is in their interest, and that what is happening isn't benefiting ERCOT, or isn't benefiting the aggregator, or isn't benefiting the rep. Getting all of these pieces are important. And it's also extremely important to the kinds of customers that sign up for this, that knowing that their contribution is having a positive impact. And I think that that's a ripe area in ERCOT right now, actually. The other thing that's important is that the service being provided needs to take advantage of the unique capabilities of what some of these DERs can do, and specifically inverter-based technologies. They're extremely good at reacting very fast and providing really valuable grid support. What they're not particularly good at is providing very conventional multi-hour capacity products. That's not what they're good at. And so by focusing on those kinds of services exist, making sure that they're in the arsenal of these aggregators making the VPPs is going to help make those VPPs more attractive to customers and therefore more successful. In like looking at some of the options available to us, you know, non-spin and the energy capacity products like that are a little bit on the less attractive side. Whereas things like responsive reserves, where the inverters can autonomously respond and, you know, do the really important work of catching the grid when it trips, those kinds of things. Inverters are really good at that, and they can provide some good support with less impact, drawing less value away from the customer's primary use case. So to give some concrete examples from some programs that we've done, you know, emergency capacity, the ELRP program in California is one that has gotten a little bit of attention lately. You see right here on the right, the customer experience of actually being in this program. They can see their contribution as well as the overall contribution of the aggregation totally. So they get that sense of community, they get that sense that they're contributing. And then you can see the chart here of the actual response of this aggregation during this event recently. So, you know, here, curious, the red line is the net load of all of the aggregated homes. Blue line is what the batteries actually did. You can see the battery charging itself up from solar, generally speaking, over the course of the day. And then when the capacity was asked for in the afternoon, you get the strong response of that. Challenge here is that, again, this is kind of traditional demand response. It's traditional multi-hour capacity, not targeted at exactly the hour that the grid needed the most support. And so, you know, it's a little more disruptive to the customers. It asks a lot of their systems. It asks a lot of their utility bills in some cases in order to get this done. It could be more targeted, and I think that there are some products in ERCOT that would allow us to do that. Another example, again, just picking things that I think are pertinent to ERCOT. In ISO New England, we're providing market-integrated regulation service, similar to ERCOT's Reg Up and Reg Down products. So responding to a 4-second dispatch signal, returning second by second, it's actually 4-second in that market telemetry back to the market operator, bidding and being settled in the market. We're doing this with our partner Green Mountain Power as part of their 4,000 Powerwall fleet that they've been building over the years. The service is active a few hours a day. You can see in the middle here, at the aggregate level, you can see how the aggregation responds to that signal. We have the green lines there. Basically, the way it works is as long as you stay in the dark green, you're at 100% performance. There's actually a line in there that shows, what the actual target was. You can't see the target line because we're painting right over it with the actual line. So again, these devices are very, very good at providing these services. The challenge with this particular service, of course, is that, this one's a little bit harder for the customer to understand exactly how they are contributing, right? It's a very valuable service, but the behavior, you can see on the right how this actually shows up to a customer, where on this particular day we were providing regulation services for the early hours of the morning, and exactly how this completely off the wall, frankly, behavior is supporting the grid is not immediately understood by your typical homeowner, and so we're working on that education piece. And then, and then finally, getting to that autonomous response, that the really high value stuff that we can provide. I know this group has had a few discussions with AMO, but we've been for many years working with AMO and providing their FCAS services there with our virtual power plants. And I haven't been mentioning how all this plays in with low-income customers. This particular program got its start as exclusively on public housing as a way to make sure that the residents of those public housing didn't bear any of the cost of the program, but got all the benefit of the utility bill savings that came with it. So that's how that got started. The GMP program has a carve-out for low income. So that's a big part of how we think about this. But you can see here an example of this providing the service. This is a contingency frequency service where when the frequency drops, we respond really quick and provide strong response. This example is when an intertie tripped and a lot of excess solar had to be absorbed very quickly. And so yes, this it started charging very, very fast. It's very well suited to VPPs in that the number of times this gets triggered is on the fewer rather than more. So it's less disruptive to the customer's primary use case, but a very valuable service to the grid, and therefore a lot of value can be brought into the VPP, making it more attractive, making the VPP bigger, meaning more capacity can come in and provide more grid services. That's the prepared slides that I have. I wanted to make sure that I covered the low income section, and I did. I'm curious if there are any other questions.
Does Will McAdams, PUC, does the use case for your systems, your VPP, change when non-spin is folded into ECRS, ERCOT Contingency Reserve Service? If you're aware of that, because again, that should launch next year. And non-spin, I always thought was supposed to move directly into ECRS. And again, that's a targeted time of day service. Mm-hmm. Does that become better for you in terms of your consumers?
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner. I mean, we are still looking at that to the degree that the ECRS is really still focused on the energy capacity thing and providing it, over time as opposed to targeting when it's actually needed. I still have some of the same concerns that I think some of the other ancillary services are more valuable. That said, there is value to be had there, and we would still participate sort of on a selective basis. I think that there's a perception that participating in these kinds of services means that we would be providing the service on an always on or a mostly on kind of scenario. That wouldn't necessarily be how it was done, but we would provide that service when it is most lucrative and then therefore, most valuable and most helpful in supporting us.
So the predictive nature of the service isn't necessarily a feature to your customers.
It can be in that knowing that it's coming up, we do have the intelligence within the devices in order to prepare themselves. And so knowing that's coming up, we would be looking ahead, we would be seeing that and scheduling it ahead of time.
Hey, Kevin, one more over here. Martha Henson from Encore. The app that you mentioned at the beginning, is that available for any customer that has a Tesla device to use, or is it only for, how does that interplay with who the aggregator and rep are for that customer?
Yeah, any customer of a Tesla product has access to the same app. So we would be, when I talk about enrollment through that, that's a matter of, communicating the opportunity and collecting enrollment information from any Tesla customer. So it wouldn't be limited to, just the select few or just those associated with the rest, although the opportunity might be, but the channel to get the message out and to do the enrollment would be available to anyone who has a problem.
Okay.
Got one more question. Chris Johnson with American Electric Power. You mentioned that the value of the Tesla VPP deployment depends on adoption through the primary use case. And the secondary use case is obviously access to the market values. I'm curious if you could speak to what you believe the primary use case is here in ERCOT, Texas.
Well, I guess to first say it very clearly exists because there is the deployed fleet. And so to that end, there are customers buying this for their own use cases now. From what we can see in how it's being used, the settings suggest that most people are getting it as a enhancement of PV systems that they're purchasing for their house in order to better control how they use that and to consume more of their own generation on their own premise. That combined with the resiliency and the backup power, certainly with some of the events that we've had in Texas over the last few years, seen a big increase in demand since then. But there's also a fair number of folks who do set the battery up with the specifics of their retail offer so that the behavior of the battery is correlated with any time differences in the rates that they're seeing.
Margo, I see you have a question.
Yeah, I was curious about the Australia model and the carve out. And when you say a carve out, is that an incentive or requirement, and who's providing the carve out, and is it a carrot or a stick?
Understood. Yeah, so, well, to answer for both, in the Australia program, it did start out as a subsidized pilot, and that pilot, made use of the public housing and was then implemented for the benefit of the residents of the low-income residents of that housing. In GMP in particular, this is a long-term tariff program that has, a certain number of slots in a given year, and there are funds available to make sure that a certain number of those slots can be made available to low-income customers at no cost to them, so that they get the resiliency benefits without having to pay the monthly cost of getting those services from a Powerwall.
So is that the Australian government that's doing that? I just wasn't clear on who's providing it at no cost.
In the first case of Australia, It was subsidized by an Australian research facility. I believe it was government affiliated. In the case of Green Mountain Power, if memory serves me correct, the low income portion of the program is funded by a nonprofit. But I would need to make sure that that's the case and check on that.
Thank you.
Margo, in the former, it's the South Australia Housing Authority, SAHA. they received a pretty substantial grant. But the economics were based on the idea that subsidization would have an overall lowering the electricity cost of service for low-income customers, whether or not they had a Powerwall in their home.
Rashmi, Michelle, I just want to clarify one thing. In one of the presentations, you said some of the activities of the DER could result in increase of the customer bill. I guess that may not be same for all of the services provided, and that would be dependent on the contract with the customers, right? There could be situations where the customer doesn't want that, and you can do just energy arbitrage and reduce their bills. And if the customer wants maybe different types, like ADERs who have higher payments, then it's known that they are making it susceptible to potential increase. Right?
Yeah.
So it's not a given that there will be an increase.
Absolutely. I don't want to leave anybody with the impression that this behavior increases bills for customers. Quite the opposite.
Yeah.
I think more than anything, the challenge is making sure that the customers understand that in all cases.
Yeah.
There are times when the behavior isn't counter to the customer's interest, but it can be counterintuitive. That the battery might be discharging or might be charging at a time they wouldn't expect it to be, but that's because it's accruing greater, benefit to the customer at that time or overall. And just making sure that that information is properly communicated is really critical.
Completely. It needs to be more transparent, and the customer should be made aware. And, and there can be different products developed.
Absolutely.
So one question I want to add right here, that customers, they have a right to opt out at any time, or they have certain contracts built up?
So not all of our programs are structured the same, but the California program that I started with in particular, and the majority of our programs going forward, that's absolutely the case. That we want to make sure that customers have the opportunity to opt out when they need to. We found that with adequate with a critical mass of participants in a VPP, that opt-outs are relatively low, and you can take that into account and still reliably provide the service.
On the programs that you don't offer the opt-out, what do those look like?
So some of those are some older programs where potentially the ownership model is a little bit different, where structured, we don't do this often anymore, but the structure can be different such that the battery is owned by a third party and the customer, for example, in the GMP program, is not paying for the battery so much as they are paying for resiliency services from the battery that is in their home. It's a little bit, it results in a little bit of an awkward relationship in terms of the expectations of the customer. That's why I started, customers have certain expectations as to what the primary use case is. And so that's why we, customer as the primary owner with their primary use case and motivating them to nominate capacity for these services is how we're increasingly approaching.
Andrew Higgins, CPS Energy, just for clarification, correct me if I'm wrong, up to this point, the customer has not been compensated on a volumetric basis for energy return, right? It's been like either they've been compensated on partial for the use of the battery, or they've been giving, like in the initial California pilot, a gift card. It wasn't until the ELRP in California that they were actually compensated on a volumetric basis for power.
I wouldn't actually say that that is true. There have been a number of programs, so, saying that they're compensated by energy is one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is simply pay for performance, right? How much did you contribute, when it was needed during an event time, if you're thinking about it in, demand response terms. Other programs like those in the East Coast with, connected solutions, the calculation of payout is a little bit convoluted, but it does come down to how much energy did you deliver during the time. And so there are a number of pay-for-performance programs out there, and I personally am a fan of those to the degree that they are aligned with motivating customers to nominate capacity.
Okay. So just as a reminder for those in the room and those online, these presentations will be filed in the project that we're operating under, 53911. We're at the end of our time, but let's try to do this. Let's try to do a lightning round of the next two presentations. Michael, are you going to do the octopus presentation? If we can maybe do like 5 minutes, and we'll do then 5 minutes on Generac.
Kieran's going to go. We'll let him run with it.
Okay.
Hi, folks. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
All right. I've just got the slides up on the screen now. Thanks very much for the invite to speak to this. It's a great pleasure to be presenting. I was so excited, in fact, to join you guys to present that I'm coming to you live all the way from London, where it's 9:30 p.m. in the evening. So as you can probably hear by my accent, I am a Brit, but please don't hold that against me. So Octopus, for anybody who's not familiar, is an energy technology startup that's valued at about $5 billion with investments from Generation Investment Management, which is Al Gore's fund, as well as the Canadian Pension Fund 2. We have about 3 million customers worldwide. And our US CEO, Michael Lee, asked us to talk to you guys because a lot of this stuff with deploying DERs in ancillary services, we're already doing around the world. And we wanted to share a couple of give an idea what's going on internationally. So you guys, as Texas, the great state of Texas, can do it bigger and better and sort of show the rest of us up. So I'm just going to really quickly walk through a couple of examples of what we've been doing with DERs in services. So the first ones I'll start with, this is from the UK, and this is all about productionizing DER dispatch. So here we have behind the meter assets participating in a range of services. So this is actually a 2.6 megawatt battery that we're optimizing. It's in the Arsenal Stadium for any soccer fans out there. And basically we're controlling and optimizing and figuring out the best revenue maximizing dispatch. In the UK, actually ancillary services are already open to behind the meter distributed assets. So we're bidding it in a whole range of services and markets, including wholesale, imbalance, frequency response, and the balancing mechanism. So on the right-hand side of the slide, basically the analogies to ERCOT are, wholesale, the settlement process, regulation, response, and real-time energy market. So it's not doing all of these things simultaneously in the same half-hour period. We have half-hour blocks in the UK, but over the course of a day, basically we can optimize and kind of decide which are the most kind of valuable sources to bid it in. And then we use the inherent flexibility within the battery to really maximize revenues there. To look at an example which has been run with customers. So this is our home energy retail customers. And in most cases, this is kind of household demand. So it's not even something fancy like electric vehicle charging or home batteries or solar, but just pure household demand. So in February and March of this year, we ran a trial with the National Grid in the UK saying, we think we can persuade customers to turn down to help you manage your own grid needs. And we gave them a small incentive. And basically, we got a massive result, a very big sort of subscription of interest with 105,000 of our customers in the UK signing up, shifting almost 200 megawatt hours of load in total. So, basically what we proved out is that customer demand shifting is a tool that the National Grid, which is our system operator in the UK, they can use it as a tool in their operations. And in fact, based on that service, they're developing a new demand flexibility service which is going to be used at a national level, and it's going to help them balance the grid in advance of kind of tight periods during the winter. Moving on. So the next one up is Power Loop. So this is a project that we ran using vehicle to grid electric vehicle charging. So that's bi-directional, where you can charge up EVs from the grid and then you can sell the energy back to the grid. So in August, for the very first time, we deployed this in National Grid's balancing mechanism. So this is National Grid's main auction for balancing the system, which runs after gate closure. And basically, the equivalent in ERCOT is a kind of real-time energy market. This is the first time that any individual asset as small as an electric vehicle was used in the balancing mechanism. So, you know, it's these 20 electric vehicles that are stacking up against the largest coal and gas power stations on the grid and being used for balancing. It really is a kind of breakthrough moment for electric vehicles and their role in the grid. Another kind of related area is Intelligent Octopus. So this is a smart charging product that we have for customers. So this is household EVs, not vehicle to grid, just single directional charging. And basically, what we can do with these vehicles is charge them smartly. So ahead of every evening, we run an optimization to find, you know, if an EV is plugged in for 10 hours overnight, then it probably only needs 4 hours of charging over that period. So what we can do is kind of optimize and take in grid signals and figure out, you know, firstly, when does the customer need the car charged by and how much charge do they need? The second thing we want to figure out is, are there any active grid constraints that we need to work around? And then the third part of the optimization is, when is it cheapest to charge? So you can see this is a dispatch event. So the pink is what we were telling the cars to do. The purple is what they were actually responding and doing. And you can see that basically, you know, during the sort of midnight to 2 a.m. window, we instructed everybody to turn down, and turn down they did. So this is something that's used in the UK for distribution networks, and the equivalent in ERCOT is retail pricing optimization. So we've got about 6,000 customers on this. We're integrating with a range of electric vehicles. We're looking at home batteries and heat pumps. And also, you know, the critical thing is this is a really good example of where, you know, we're working with a few EV manufacturers who are very forward thinking in terms of opening up their APIs for us to use and interact with. We were able to make the investment and put the work into a product that, when you kind of combine, you know, what Octopus is doing with the OEM, you know, we've come up with this really valuable product for a customer that extracts even more value out of their, you know, their home energy devices. So for this reason, you know, we're big fans of sort of open access and working with OEMs to create value ultimately for the customer. Here's a really quick example. So we're not just doing this in the UK, but we're looking further afield to Europe. So we've got a couple of pilots with the Belgian grid operator called Elia and the 50 Hertz, which runs a part of the German grid. And we're looking to replicate some of that Intelligent Octopus, you know, smart optimization of electric vehicles and heat pumps in Belgium and in Germany. And, you know, they're very excited about it too. We're hopefully going to be starting that in the second half of this year. So watch this space. That one's coming up very soon. So, I mean, that really is kind of a lightning round in terms of international case studies. But we'll be making the slides available, so anybody can kind of go take a look at these afterwards. But the point that we really wanted to make is, you know, like, we're working with the broadest possible range of DERs, so it is possible to use all of these DERs, and it's possible to use customer load at home. We're also working with the broadest possible range of grid services and trying to open up grid services to these things. And, you know, the international examples show that this really is possible. So to the extent that people want to chat to us a bit more about the UK or the European example, we're very receptive to that. Just wanted to say a really quick note on customer communications. And I think, you know, the previous presenter from Tesla made the point really well, that I think, you know, for all of us guys and girls, you know, we really love the energy network side of things and the grid services side of things. But ultimately, if you're working with customers and working with householders, it's so important how you communicate to them. And, you know, translating it into a language that ordinary people can understand, being really predictable and consistent in communications, using simple language and making sure customers understand the benefits and the offer for them. Those are all really key parts of making this a success, and ultimately getting that kind of controllable load in place that you're going to need. So I'll just hand over to Michael Jewell just to wrap things up.
And excuse me, just 2 quick points with regard to the last 2 slides. First is something that has come up in the last presentation as well, about the need to ensure coordination of retail use of the DER with the use in the aggregation. There can be some counterintuitive interplay there, and it's important to be sure that ultimately we're getting the higher value for the customer. And then next slide, please. The other key point that we wanted to make is just like a number of the different folks that have presented earlier, we support the use of IEEE 2030.5 and ensuring the ability to allow the customers to be able to, excuse me, switch not only between retail electric providers, but also the ability to move between different aggregations as well. And Jason, with that, I'll turn it back over to y'all.
Thanks, Michael and Kieran. Any questions for Octopus Energy? Very helpful information. So, JT, I will turn it over to you if you want to try a lightning round on behalf of Generac, and then we will.
Thank you, sir. I will share screen here real quick and try to make this as quick as possible here for the group that's remaining. So. Can you see everything okay on my screen, Jason, for you and the team? All right, awesome. Real simple, right? Our strategy with the formation of Generac Grid Services is really to try to bring together really 3 different things, right? The technology, batteries, home standby generation, storage, and now, thermostats with the acquisition of ecobee, with a control platform that is the legacy Enbala solution that some may be familiar with our Concerta platform, and then being able to go into wholesale markets such as ERCOT and other locations around the globe and provide some services around that, right? And we're doing that through a host of different use cases, both with load and generation. Some of you probably saw the news release today where we'll be providing a lot of these for Dominion Energy there on the East Coast. And a couple of weeks ago with our announcement with bringing both capacity and some of these same use cases to Arizona Public Service in the greater Phoenix area. But specific to the use cases with batteries, that folks can see this on our on the deck when they pull it. But right, a lot of these we're doing outside of Texas right now, and I want to share one example of what we're doing in Texas, and then an example of what we're doing somewhere else around the globe, and just really kind of end it with like where we see our role with this going forward. So why do we care about Texas? I think I mentioned this at our introduction a couple weeks ago, right? We have almost 472,000 assets that Generac has deployed inside the state of Texas, right? Everything from C&I generation to batteries to a lot of home standby generators and ecobee thermostats. And even if you just look at this year or just kind of the year to date, right, through the first 7 months of this year, if you look at the average weekly installation of Generac assets, it's up 52% compared to the previous years. So, right, what's the takeaway? Folks are buying these devices and these assets, and they're putting them in their homes. So why can't they monetize it, right? Let's give them the opportunity, right? So let's talk about what we've done in ERCOT, right? We have taken an aggregation of home standby generators, and we have, through a partner, that is serving as the QSC, actually participating in ERS. And for the July 13th event that was called, where we're all kind of sweating a little bit, we had only 5 opt-outs, and what you're seeing on the right side of the screen there is the aggregation of home standby units that were responding to the ERS signal. And mind you, we're not injecting into the grid. We're actually just offsetting home load in this case, right? So we are doing that. We're continuing to recruit customers, offering different incentives to participate within ERS and our partners. I wanted to highlight AGL just quickly because I think it's very important because they're set up similar to what what Texas is like, right, in the Australian market. Tesla mentioned this earlier, and AutoGrid as well. But there, we have over 2,000 homes whereby we're actually providing, load response, participation in the wholesale market there with AGL, and actually telling batteries not to export. But then when they need to, because of, sometimes a $14,000 a megawatt hour price, yes, please export and let's recognize revenue. And here recently we started working through and providing what we would call primary frequency response, whereby we're actually telling the inverters locally to, once they sense, that there is a droop on the system locally, to actually respond locally, right? And so again, takeaway here is that, right, we're able to do this elsewhere, and we think, right, we can take those lessons learned and apply them here in ERCOT. So just trying to kind of close out, Jason, for you and the team there, is like, where do we see ourselves, right? At the end of the day, it's kind of the convergence of a couple of different stakeholders and players and actors in the guild, right? We understand that customers need to monetize their assets. We also think that, right, through the participation in these markets, that it will actually promote further investment, because people will now see that they can realize a return on the investment. It's really important for the areas such as the LMI, and I know that Margot asked a question around that. Happy to talk about that offline around our partnerships with Posigen, where we're actually providing this as a resource to the LMI community outside of the state of Texas right now, especially in the Northeast, right? For the NOEs, right, we understand that there's a need to provide programs and services, use it as a cost avoidance mechanism like 4CP, right, to be able to reshape the load. But we also believe that there is an initial benefit, right, to using those same assets to solve feeder level problems, distribution level problems. The same could be said really for the TDSPs, right? We understand that their foremost concern is having visibility into the DERs that are on their system, to understand the impact, and also to see that those same assets that are participating in an ERCOT related program or service can also be used to solve for grid problems that they're seeing at the distribution level, right? And at the end of the day, still having the ability to override any type of charge discharge, load curtailment, if it is there to solve, basically take care of an emergency situation on, say, the distribution system behind a given substation down a given circuit. And lastly, for our friends that are reps, right, we understand that, hey, look, at the end of the day, they're trying to gain and retain customers through programs and services, monetize that, and really use that to serve both customer and company in generating revenue. So all that being said, for the team here, where we feel like, we're kind of our thought process as we run into this, right, with ADER and the task force as a whole, is we think, we're very open to multiple different participation models, right? But at the end of the day, we want to get as many customers into these programs as possible so that we can look at the different value streams and revenue opportunities and honestly use cases that benefit all of the various stakeholders here. So with that, Jason, I'll serve it back to you and see if anyone has any questions.
Thanks, JT. Any questions for Generac?
So JT, just to clarify, so in Australia with AGL, Generac batteries are participating in a export program. Are you doing an export program anywhere else?
So quick clarification, we are not using Generac batteries there. Generac batteries, the power cell is actually not approved yet for the island / continent / country. So we're using connections to Tesla and SolarEdge batteries there. As far as export here, there are some smaller projects that we're working on. We will be doing that again with APS as we roll out our program there in Phoenix with about 5 megawatts, roughly about 1,000 homes. Where we will be exporting at specific times and also just offsetting home load at certain times depending on grid need, and also same can be said for some of the work we're doing out in the Northeast. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, and is the Northeast are those utilities or is that an RTO program that you're working under?
Utility specific. utility specific. We have not, just in full disclosure, we have not taken any type of market position in the wholesale markets up there, both with, you know, New York ISO, ISO New England, or PJM.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? Well, let me thank Shell, Sunrun, AutoGrid, Tesla, Octopus, and Generac for spending some time with us today. We don't know your business as well as you do, so you've really helped the rest of the task force that's not in this business understand more what we're talking about, how many different models there are. And so thank you for helping to advance our understanding. The presentations that were given today, as I said earlier, will be filed in project 53911 later this week, along with a link on YouTube for a replay of this workshop for those of you that have colleagues that may be interested in watching a replay. Thank you all for being here. We're going to take a small break and we'll regroup for our second workshop of the day right on time. It'll be a different link on Teams for those of you following along on Teams. Thank you.